Forbes magazine calls 2019 the year that Republicans in Wyoming started acting like Democrats in Washington, after House Bill 220 threatens to impact the largest private sector employers in our state to the tune of a 7% tax. This is quite the leap from the 0% currently in place and adopts Democratic practices that fly in the face of national trends, despite legislative assertions that we are behind the times. In reality, the push for a corporate income tax in Wyoming comes at a time when other states, both red and blue, are moving in the opposite direction and working to eliminate state corporate taxes. Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Indiana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and others are moving in the opposite direction, knowing that the words of Ronald Reagan ring true. Cut taxes, cut regulation, cut spending. In Reagan's last speech in the Oval Office, he said this: "Common sense told us that when you put a big tax on something, the people will produce less of it. So we cut the people's tax rates, and the people produced more than ever before. The economy bloomed like a plant that had been cut back and could now grow, quicker and stronger." Opponents of House Bill 220 include the Wyoming Retail Association and the Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association. These people know the effects that this bill will have on our citizens in our state: less jobs and less pay. The Joint Appropriations Committee made an interim priority to simplify the budget process and review interim streams. But have they really done this? With a biennial budget of $9 billion, shouldn't we know where all that money is going and why? The real problem is spending, not revenue. We hear about proposals to revenue, but when was the last time that you heard a serious proposal to reduce spending? They toy instead with tax increases to close the deficits. Economic evidence from the Tax Foundation suggests that corporate income taxes are the most harmful type of tax, and that workers bear a portion of the burden. Reducing the corporate income tax will benefit workers as new investments boost productivity and lead to wage growth. House Bill 220 would shrink the long-run size of the economy, reduce capital stock and investments into our state, and lead to lower wages and fewer jobs. Wyoming will not be competitive in the nationwide big business market if the cost reward is significantly and very suddenly reduced. The elimination of corporate income tax rate leads to several positive economic effects, including encouraged investment in Wyoming. As additional investments grow, the demand for labor to work will increase, leading to higher productivity, output, employment, and wages over time. The corporate income tax rate is an important determinant in how many people are willing to invest in new capital, and also where they will place that new capital. One key reason that capital is so sensitive to taxation is because capital is highly mobile. For example, it is relatively easy for a company to move its operations or choose to locate its next investment in a lower tax jurisdiction. But it is more difficult for a worker to move his or her family to get a lower tax bill. This means capital is very responsive to tax changes. Lowering the corporate income tax rate reduces the amount of economic harm it causes. A common misunderstanding is that corporations bear the cost of corporate income tax. But economic literature indicates that the true burden of the corporate income is split between the workers through lower wages and owners of the corporation. As capital moves away in response to high statutory corporate income tax rates, productivity and wages for the relatively immobile workers fall. Empirical studies show that labor bears between 50 and 100% of the burden of the corporate income tax. In the long run, it is split evenly by both capital and labor. To understand why the lower corporate tax rate drives growth in capital stock, wages, jobs, and the overall size of the economy, it's important to understand how the corporate income tax rate affects economic decisions. When businesses think about making a new investment in a capital good, like a piece of equipment, they add up all of the costs of doing so, including taxes, and they weigh those costs against the expected revenue the capital will generate. The higher the tax, the higher the cost of the capital, the less capital that can be created and employed. So, a higher corporate income tax reduces the long-run capital stock and reduces the long-run size of the economy. Conversely, lowering the corporate income tax incentivizes new investments, leading to an increase of the capital stock. Of all the permanent elements considered during the tax reform debates, reducing the corporate tax rate is the most pro-growth. The reason is simple. More capital for workers boosts productivity, and productivity is a large determinant in wages and other forms of compensation. This happens because as businesses invest in additional capital, the demand for labor to work with the capital rises, and wages rise too. Tax rate differences create incentives for businesses to earn more income in low tax jurisdictions and less income in higher tax jurisdictions. Raising the corporate income tax rate damages economic output in the private sector, plain and simple. Now, some say that a corporate tax rate that is more in line with our competitors reduces the incentives for businesses to realize their profits in lower tax jurisdictions. But good business indicates that companies will keep costs as low as possible to make money. So, when variable costs increase in a particular jurisdiction, the business may choose to move elsewhere to eliminate that variable, or to decrease other variable costs like employee salaries or downsizing, or to increase marginal costs, the costs that arise for the production of an additional unit. A corporate tax will encourage companies to invest elsewhere, or will carry significant economic consequences to employees and consumers. To put it in perspective, Walmart, who is the biggest private employer in the state of Wyoming, may cut salaries, may lay off workers, or may raise their costs. They may also choose to move or not build more locations in our state. And all of this risk comes with the reward that Wyoming can keep spending, and spending without a more intensive study on whether or not we can close our deficit and become more economically responsible and accountable. This is an easy way out, and it's certainly not fair at all, nor is it sustainable and economically prudent. If our sustainability model is to keep raising more money to promote spending, that will never last. Raising the corporate tax rate would walk back any pro-growth initiatives and will hurt the citizens of our state.